My name is Emily Carter, and I turned 28 last week. I wish I could say it was a day filled with laughter, cake, and love, but instead, it became the day I finally broke. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below, and if you were in my place, tell me how you'd rate what I did, 1 to 10. Maybe you'll call it revenge, or maybe you'll call it justice. I'll let you decide. Birthdays were never huge in our house, but my parents always made a fuss over my younger sister, Sophia. Growing up, she was their golden girl, perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect everything. And I was the background noise, the one they forgot to include in photos, the one whose trophies collected dust in the attic while hers were displayed front and center. It used to hurt, then I told myself I didn't care. But deep down, I did. I cared so much it hollowed me out. When I woke up that morning, I told myself maybe this year would be different. Maybe turning 28 meant I was old enough for them to finally see me, not as the failure who didn't live up to Sophia's shadow, but as a woman who built her own life, her own business, her own strength. I even bought a small cake for myself the night before, set it quietly in the fridge, thinking I'd surprise them for once. I was wrong. So wronged. At noon, my mother called from downstairs, her voice bright and sugary. Emily, come help me decorate. It's your sister's special day. For a second, I thought she'd mixed up the dates. Mom, I said, half laughing, you mean my birthday, right? There was a pause. Then she sighed, that heavy sigh she reserved for disappointment. Sweetheart, we're celebrating Sophia's promotion. She deserves it. Yours is just another day. My hands went cold. I stood there, holding the phone, listening to the laughter drifting from the living room, the sound of balloons being blown up, pink and gold, Sophia's favorite colors. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Years of being overlooked, ignored, dismissed, they all converged into a single, burning thought. No more. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled, calmly, almost eerily, because I finally realized something powerful. They had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. They'd forgotten that quiet doesn't mean weak. That day, I decided to make them remember. I didn't rush my revenge. No, that would have been too easy, too loud, too temporary. I wanted it to sting, to make every condescending look, every forgotten birthday, every careless word echo back at them until they finally understood what it felt like to be invisible. I walked downstairs like nothing had happened. My mother was busy setting up the table, draping gold ribbons across it while Sophia pranced around in her designer heels, talking about her promotion like she'd just saved the world. Dad was, as usual, on his phone, probably checking emails he'd pretend were more important than his daughter. I stood there for a moment, watching them. My family. The people who'd never once truly seen me. Happy birthday, Sophia said casually, as if tossing me a bone. Oh, wait. It's not yours today, right? She laughed, sipping her champagne. My mother joined in. My dad didn't even look up. My knuckles went white, but I smiled. Always the quiet one. Always the calm one. Always the one they underestimated. That's what made what came next so perfect. I excused myself, walked back upstairs, and opened the drawer where I kept the small silver USB drive, the one my parents didn't know existed. I'd found it 6 months earlier when Dad left his laptop open at our family cabin. It contained things I wasn't supposed to see, things about his business trips, about money he hid, and a few emails that would have ruined the image of our perfect, respected family if anyone else saw them. I didn't plan to use it, not then. I thought maybe, someday, it would help me understand why my family had always been so cold. But now it felt like fate had handed me a loaded gun. Downstairs, I could hear laughter again, Sophia's voice cutting through like a knife. I scrolled through the files, reading his messages, each one darker than the last. Bribes. Affairs. Lies. a trail of betrayal long enough to burn through the foundation of everything they stood for. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt in control. I made copies, encrypted the files, and sent them to a cloud account under an alias. Then I took a deep breath, fixed my hair, and walked back into the party. They were taking pictures now, Sophia in the middle, my parents on either side, glasses raised high. "Come on, Emily, get in one for once," Mom said half-heartedly. I stepped in beside them, smiled for the camera, and whispered softly, "Say goodbye to your perfect little world." Nobody heard me over the click of the shutter. But I did. When the evening rolled on, I played my part. Polite smiles, small talk, laughter that didn't reach my eyes. I waited for the right moment, the calm before the storm. And when it came, it was perfect. As Sophia opened her gifts, showing off her diamond bracelet from Dad, I raised my glass. To family, I said. Everyone turned. To love, loyalty, and truth. They clapped, but then I smiled wider. Especially the truth. My phone buzzed in my hand, confirmation that the files had just been sent to every major investor my father worked with. I looked at him across the table, that confident, untouchable man, and thought, happy birthday to me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their smiling faces, the way my mom leaned into my sister's shoulder like she was the pride of her life, the way my dad clinked his glass and said, "To our daughter, who truly makes us proud." The words echoed in my skull like a curse. I got up, walked over to the mirror, and looked at myself, messy hair, tear-streaked cheeks, and a gaze I hardly recognized. Something in me had cracked wide open. I whispered, "Happy birthday, Chloe." My voice was hollow. Then I said again louder, "Happy birthday to the daughter they forgot." It was the first time I truly realized what I had become, invisible to my own family. But I wasn't going to stay invisible. Not anymore. I had spent years being the nice one, the forgiving one, the quiet one. But on that night, staring into that mirror, something dark and powerful began to grow inside me, a need not just to be seen, but to make them regret every single time they made me feel like I didn't exist. The next morning, I put on a smile so convincing it scared even me. When my mother called, not to apologize, but to ask if I could help tidy up after the party, I said yes. Of course I did. Because revenge isn't about rage. It's about patience. It's about waiting for the right moment to strike. And I was done being their family punching bag. When I got there, Emily was still basking in the afterglow of her perfect night. She was wearing one of the designer robes our parents had gifted her, the kind I always wanted but was told was too expensive. My mother greeted me with her usual lukewarm smile, pretending last night hadn't happened. But my dad? He couldn't even look me in the eye. I could tell he was embarrassed, not because of what they'd done, but because I had witnessed it. That's when I knew they weren't ashamed of how they treated me. They were ashamed that I noticed that I played my role that day, quiet, helpful, harmless. But inside, I was making plans. My family had always been obsessed with appearances, my dad's image in the community, my mom's reputation among her rich friends, my sister's flawless social media presence. They cared about looking perfect. So that's where I would hit them, where it hurt the most. I knew their secrets. The things whispered behind closed doors, the lies hidden under their polished smiles. My father's little business trips that weren't business at all. My mother's charity fund that didn't exactly reach the poor. My sister's college scholarship that wasn't earned, but bought. I had kept their secrets for years, thinking silence would earn me love. But now, silence would be my weapon. That night, I opened my laptop and started writing. I wasn't sure what I was making at first, maybe a confession, maybe a warning. But as my fingers flew over the keys, I realized it was a story. My story. Their story. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel thing they ever did, I wrote it down. I didn't change names. I didn't soften the details. And when I finished, I uploaded it anonymously to a blog I titled The Forgotten Daughter. Within 48 hours, it went viral. People shared it, dissected it, sympathized with the narrator, with me. For the first time, I was seen. My mother called in a panic, my father was furious, and Emily was crying. They didn't know it was me, not yet. They were terrified of exposure. But I wasn't done. Oh no. That was only the beginning. The real revenge wasn't just about telling the world who they really were, it was about making them live with it. Making them feel every ounce of humiliation, confusion, and heartbreak they'd made me feel. Because when you spend your whole life being ignored, the sweetest sound in the world is the gasp of realization when the people who underestimated you finally understand. You were never weak. You were waiting. The fallout from the blog was cleaner and sharper than I'd imagined, like a surgeon's cut rather than a slap. It started with small things. Whispered comments at school gates my mother once ruled, a cold shoulder from a woman who used to fawn over her at charity luncheons, an inbox full of messages from old family friends asking if the rumors were true. Then the larger tremors began. My father's email exploded with questions from the board. Investors who had trusted his transparent leadership demanded audits. The charity my mother had used as a social stage faced inquiries. Donors wanted receipts, and volunteers who had been paid in promises began to speak. My sister's scholarship, the one that had given her the perfect veneer at alumni events, was suddenly under review when an investigative journalist called to ask about the donation trail. Overnight, the perfect household my parents had polished for decades started to look like an exhibit in a museum of deception. People I barely recognized posted screenshots from the blog, their captions dripping with righteous anger or shallow delight. I watched it all unfold with a calm I didn't completely recognize. It felt surreal, like watching a film where you knew the next line before anyone else said it. But for all their social collapse, I did not feel triumph the way I had expected. The first time that hit me was when my mother called, voice trembling so much it sounded as though she might break. "Who did this?" she whispered, and for a second I almost said nothing. Almost let her drown in the consequences. But then a strange thing happened. A ripple of something soft and very human moved through me. I remembered the little girl who used to braid Sophia's hair while Mom read from charity brochures. The nights I'd stayed up to warm their dinners while they slept off commitments. The times I'd wiped their wine glasses and swallowed the hurt of being passed over. I had wanted them to feel the sting, yes, but I hadn't wanted them to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Still, the consequences were real, and they had to live with them. I had set a mirror before them, and, whether they liked it or not, they were forced to look. Public humiliation is a strange beast. It doesn't only punish the guilty, it rearranges the lives around them. My father's phone became a furnace of angry calls, his assistant quit, and details of questionable deals he'd made surfaced in threads that multiplied like mold. The bank called with awkward formalities, then silence. Friends who once laughed at their lavish dinners suddenly avoided invitation lists that included their names. My mother, who once smiled as if the world owed her mercy, now walked with a softness to her step that looked like defeat. But what I wanted most was not their ruin. It was to carve space for my own existence in a home that had always denied it. I wanted them to remember me without the filter of indifference, to recognize that the girl they dismissed had a spine and a voice loud enough to split their constructed truth. So I kept going. I released more pieces, documentary photos of receipts, private messages where deals were discussed in crass detail, even a recording of my father promising favors in exchange for discreet silence. Each piece was surgical. I anonymized the source, made sure the narrative could not be dismissed as a jealous sibling's rant. The story became bigger than our family. It became a parable that people shared not just for the scandal but for the idea that appearances can hide our at home. The atmosphere turned poisonous. My father grew smaller, pacing the house with hands in his pockets, an old man wearing a man's shell. He started meeting with lawyers, voices muffled behind closed doors, and nights when the house used to echo with polite laughter now filled with the quiet hum of a television left on low. Sophia retreated into a shell I recognized in myself, the practiced smile, the forced cheer. She confronted me once, her eyes raw with hurt and a bitterness that made me flinch. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You could have just talked to me. We're family." I wanted to tell her about 1,000 small cuts, the birthdays forgotten, the times I watched her celebrate while I pretended not to notice. I wanted to list every moment that taught me my presence was optional. But I didn't. Instead, I said, I told the truth. That answer felt too small and too big at once. She left the room shaking, and later I found out she'd called our mother, begging for explanations from a family that couldn't provide them without incriminating themselves. Outside, the world argued about us like we were a scandal in a TV series, some condemning the wrongs my family had done, others pitying my parents as casualties of a cruel exposure. I read comments that said I had gone too far. Others praised me as a heroine who dared to peel back the curtain on hypocrisy. The split didn't comfort me. What it did do was make the house into a stranger. For the first time in my life, I felt the complex mixture of power and isolation. I had given myself visibility, but at a cost. Every day, I watched people who used to be my anchors flounder, and each time I felt a pinprick of empathy twist with the satisfaction of having been seen. The revenge had taken shape not as a burning blaze, but as a slow, deliberate frost that changed the landscape. And while they scrambled to salvage what they could, I began to think about what I wanted beyond exposure. Revenge had been the blade I used to carve out attention, but attention alone would not heal the hollow years of being invisible. I started to plan not just for further blows to their reputation, but for the life I would build after the storm. A life where my birthdays would be noticed, where my accomplishments would be celebrated, and where I would no longer be the quiet background to my sister's applause. Still, before any rebuilding could begin, there was one last part of the plan, a moment that would force them to face me directly, not as an anonymous accuser, but as their daughter. I wanted them to look into my eyes and see the person they'd forgotten. So, I prepared the stage. The day I chose to show myself was not theatrically planned. I did not storm into a gala or shout from our rooftop. Instead, I invited them, my family, to a small gathering under the polite pretense of talking things over. I told them nothing of the crowd that would come, of the journalist I'd emailed who had requested to cover a family reconciliation, or of the handful of neighbors and distant relatives who'd quietly RSVP'd because curiosity had outmatched discretion. I wanted the moment to be intimate enough to still hurt, public enough to be honest, and unavoidable enough that they could not hide behind excuses or fluffed-up reputations. When they arrived, they wore the same practiced smiles they had always perfected. Sophia clutched a bouquet she'd bought on the way, my mother dabbed a handkerchief to hide nerves, and my father's jaw was set in the defensive line I had known since childhood. I had dressed simply, not to punish them, but because nothing about their polished masks should distract from what I was about to say. I began quietly, speaking as if I were telling a story to an old friend, because in many ways that's what it was, the untold story of 28 years of being unseen. I read aloud passages from the blog, my words, my memories, the evidence, each sentence a measured strike that landed just where it needed to. I watched their faces change like weather. Confusion, denial, anger, then the slow, shattering recognition that what they had built around themselves was built on choices and compromises they'd never intended to justify. I watched my father's face go ashen not because of public disgrace, but because his authority, the one he'd wielded at the dinner table and boardroom, had been dismantled by his own daughter's quiet insistence on truth. Sophia wept openly, not the polite, staged tears parents love to display on milestone days, but raw, unpracticed sobs that sounded like the breaking of trust. My mother's hands trembled as she tried to reach for me and then withdrew, as if afraid contact might burn her. When I finished reading, there was a silence, so heavy the clock in the hallway seemed to stop. Then the journalist, who had expected drama, asked the single question I had been waiting to hear. "Why now, Emily? Why this way?" I answered plainly, "Because birthdays taught me who remembers you and who doesn't. Because every overlooked year stacked into a lifetime. And because I want them to know I am not invisible anymore." Hearing the words aloud felt like peeling off an old, itchy sweater. They fit and they hurt, both at once. Then, before anyone could speak, my father tried the only defense he knew, to belittle the messenger. He raised his voice, attempting to gaslight, to insist that private matters be kept private, that reputations matter more than messy truths. But this time the audience was not only my parents. Neighbors I'd helped in secret stood up, one by one, and testified to kindnesses I had silently performed. The meals I had left for an elderly neighbor, the tutoring sessions for a cousin, the quiet donations to a battered shelter under a name no one would have expected. Their voices wove a different picture of me than the one my family had painted. Something shifted in my parents then, not entirely into contrition, but enough that the brittle armor around their hearts cracked. My father, who had always been a monument to self-defense, looked smaller than I had ever seen him. My mother's eyes filled with a sorrow that was not entirely for herself, but for the daughter she had allowed to fade into the background. Sophia, shaking, reached for my hand and asked me, softly uncertain, how I could forgive. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not a single act but a choice to stop being defined by wounds. I told her I would not poison my life with endless reprisals. I wanted recognition, not revenge for its own sake. I wanted a seat at the table that was mine by right, not as an afterthought, not as the quiet one, but as Emily, daughter, sister, human. The admission surprised them. Perhaps they had expected vengeful triumph, vindictive gloating, not a tempered demand for fundamental dignity. Over the following months, the world kept watching as the fractures in our household slowly became seams for repair. My father faced inquiries, yes, and the business that had been his identity took hits he couldn't ignore. Some doors closed, others opened. My mother's social calendar emptied and, for the first time, she had to reckon with what her life meant without the applause she had depended on. Sophia and I, after many difficult conversations, began to relearn one another. Awkwardly at first, then more honestly. She apologized, not with grand statements but with small, consistent acts, inviting me to her events and truly listening, asking for my opinion and keeping it, standing beside me when acquaintances whispered. I did not pretend their hurt had not been real, nor did I pretend I hadn't savored the revelation of truth. But I also discovered that the sweetest victory was not the collapse of their image. It was the building of a life I chose because of time. Friends who had once been strangers offered jobs and partnerships to a woman they now knew could see and write truth. Readers of the blog reached out with opportunities to speak and to help others who felt invisible. I built a small consultancy to support people who'd been neglected in their families or workplaces, teaching them how to claim space, how to tell their stories without shame, how to convert hurt into constructive power. On the day I opened the small office, painted a calm blue, I invited my family. They were hesitant, but they came. We shared tea not because everything was fixed, but because we had chosen to try. My father, quieter now, said nothing grand. Instead, he left a folded note on my desk that read, simply, "I'm sorry." It was a beginning, imperfect and human. If you've followed this story from the start, maybe you'll judge me harshly, or maybe you'll understand the slow burn of being overlooked. Either way, I want to ask again, where are you watching from, and how would you rate this story from 1 to 10? Revenge can be a dark, intoxicating thing, but what I learned is this. Justice is not only about making others feel the pain they caused. It's about making space for the life you want. The last image I'll leave you with is not one of triumph over the fallen, but of someone who stood up in her own life and demanded to be seen. That, to me, was always worth more than any applause they had ever stolen.